Well, good evening.
Good evening.
It's a great honor to be in the city of brotherly love and sisterly charm. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Uncle Bobbie for sponsoring us. And for those of you who've been able to pick up a copy of the book and read it, I want you to know that this is probably going to be one of the most important books written this year to talk about Black women path in American politics and Black women's future in American politics. We talk about our mentors, our sheroes, we talk about our heroes, we talk about those in the movement who have served and who have inspired us to serve. So with that, I am going to do something rare, which is to turn the mic over to my esteemed sister, Minyon Moore, to tell us why Color Girls. How did we come up with the title, The Color Girls? Can you tell that story?
Good evening. Good evening. I must start by saying it is wonderful to see so many ladies and gents. I see a few, but it is wonderful to see the Colored Girls. Well, I tell you, the story of the Colored Girls actually got started when Donna and I were working for Dukakis Benson in 1988. And when I first arrived, Donna was actually on strike. So I called her, I said, so Donna, where are you? And she says, well, I'm on strike. So, you know, I'm holding the phone like Whitney Houston, like, strike? How do you strike in a campaign? But fast forward, she was striking because they had not given her money for the Congressional Black Caucus and for their event. And so it was a good strike. Well, soon we heard that they were moving us, meaning African Americans, people of color, women, down to a different floor in the campaign. And so as Donna liked to say, when the powers that be, mostly the white people, when they went out to have cocktails at 5 o'clock, we got into mischief. We found an empty room on the floor where we knew all the powers that be were gonna be. We moved us in a table. We wrote on a piece of paper, Colored Girls, we shall not be moved, and stuck it on the door. So that's how we started with Colored Girls.
Leah, before Black Lives Matter, there was Brooklyn, there was the activism, and the belief that one person could make a difference. We're in a, former house of worship? Yeah. But you are grounded in the Lord and the Bible. Tell us about your call to service in Brooklyn before Black Lives Matter.
Hello, Philly. I spent a year of my life here.
All right.
Getting to know the city as I was planning in the DNC, so I'm glad to be back here in city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Yeah. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah. Where Brooklyn at? I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm the daughter of an activist minister, Reverend Daughtry.
Yes.
And I am myself a fifth generation pastor, dating back to the days of enslavement, and faith runs deeply in our family. In fact, I have a whole stream of family that lives in Philadelphia, and they're coming, at least they're supposed to be coming. Oh, there he is, that's my cousin. and he is an imam, Imam Salih Abdul Rauf. I learned I had to practice many years to say that, but so faith is a thread in our family. And growing up, my dad led us from my grandfather's thread, led us in an activist ministry, a holistic approach to the understanding of the gospel, which says that our salvation is out of our salvation grows a commitment to community and a commitment to the gospel. And that means the grace of God, the mercy of God, the justice of God. Yes. So my earliest memory was when I was 6. I went with my dad to a boycott with Reverend Jesse Jackson. We were boycotting A&P supermarkets because they wouldn't hire black people. So that was my earliest memory of making signs and being on the boycott line and being at marches and being at rallies. And so that's the foundation out of which I grew, and it was just an article of faith for us that it was not enough and it wasn't an accurate representation of our faith to simply go to church on Sunday and Bible study. Now, I'm Pentecostal, so that meant we went to church every day.
All day.
All day. All day, every day.
All day long.
Bible study, choir rehearsal, noonday prayer, all of that. I ushered, I cooked the chicken, I opened the church, I turned on the lights, buy the chicken, clean the chicken, cook the chicken, serve the chicken, clean the kitchen, all of that. And then go usher and lead the choir, right? But when that was over, then what we had to do was make the signs for the rally and run off the flyers and organize. We learned how to organize early because those were the days before the internet. So when my dad would call, he was the chair of the National Black United Front. When he would call a rally and 10,000 people would show up, it was because we had touched 30,000. Actually touched 30,000. Because there was no black radio. There was just a flyer on the mimeograph machines with the blue hands. Y'all remember those? And you had to crank it up. So that became an article of faith for me. That was how I got started in the movement. And my father always asked us or encouraged us to choose our own path for service. And ultimately, I chose the path of electoral politics because it seemed to me that everything that happened in our communities had a connection to who was in office. Where the trash got picked up, where you went to school, everything was connected to your elected officials. And if I could help make a difference there, through that channel, then I could help to change the conditions of our communities.
But I think what you don't know about Donna is she has been at the epicenter of almost every important campaign in modern history. Not only did she run one herself, and won, by the way, and the Supreme Court, we must know how important it is because the Supreme Court gave it to Bush, but that's okay. But she's going to take us back a little bit because I think it's important for you all to understand how we all got involved in politics. So she's going to take us Jackson '84 and bring us on up.
Thank you so much. Well, Minyon and I have a great history together. I also have a remarkable history with this young lady. I drove up at the age of 20 with two other friends from Louisiana to attend a Black United Front, Forward Together, Backwards Never event in Brooklyn, New York. So I go back to Leah Daughtry and her father to almost 1980, and of course meeting Minyon through my Jackson experience. Many of you know that 34 years ago, Reverend Jesse Jackson made history. When he said our time has come, what he was referring to, it was time that we began to take our seats at the table. Long before Shirley Chisholm decided to run, we know that Fannie Lou Hamer played a very important role in ensuring that especially black people from the South, the segregated South where I grew up, had a place inside the Democratic Party. So Jesse Jackson, that country preacher from the great state of South Carolina, was able to not just forge a coalition, but Reverend Jesse Jackson registered millions of new voters who used their political power to change the Democratic Party, to empower people to take their seats at the table, to encourage lawmakers not just to run for state offices, but also to run for federal offices. Had it not been for Reverend Jackson's two historic campaigns, there would never have been a Barack Obama in 2008, 10 years ago, in terms of his ability to win the Democratic nomination and, of course, go on to win the presidency. So we spent a lot of time in the book talking about Reverend Jackson, talking about those two historic campaigns. We talk about the fundamental changes that we experienced as Democrats, ensuring that we got rid of winner take all. We got rid of the kind of primaries that denied people of color the right to sit at the table. And Reverend Jackson wasn't just about energizing and empowering African Americans or black people. He was about empowering the Rainbow Coalition. He was one of the first presidential candidates to hire people of color, of all colors, and not just with token positions. Reverend didn't believe in tokenism. Reverend believed in empowerment and inclusion. Today is the National Coming Out Day, and it was Reverend Jackson, Minyon remembers, that brought in openly gays and lesbians to serve on campaign teams at a time when people wasn't even taking money from gays and lesbians. So Reverend Jackson should be given credit. In our book, we pay tribute to Reverend Jackson as one of our icons. And I want to let you all know that we should know this history. We should know that being Democrats, and yes, we're Democrats, we're still members of the Democratic National Committee. Yes, we're still at the table. And we've made room for others, and we're going to continue to make room for others. We'll scoot over and let anybody come and take their seats at the table, but we're still on the Rules Committee because we believe that the rules should be fair and the rules should be the same no matter who decides to run.
And on that point, Reverend used to tell us, you got to know the rules in order to know how to break rules. And so, you know, it's a badge of honor, I think, now that we're all on the Rules Committee. And so when it's time to vote on something, we all, you know, align ourselves to make sure that the rules of the party are reflective of where we think our people ought to be. But I want to, as we think about the book, and we talk a lot about our experiences and the various experiences we've had in places where sometimes we were the first, sometimes we were the only, and we try to cut paths. I want to ask Minyon and also Donna. Minyon, what's it like to work in the White House? Minyon was the first African American to be the political director in the White House ever.
She got two promotions while being in the White House.
And so as political director,
Don't believe the hype. That was
no, seriously, because she's a very modest person, but the political director, she runs the president's politics. So a black woman was running President Clinton's politics. That is major accomplishment, and so that's her footnote in history. So tell people, for those of us, some of us don't even go to the White House. Ain't been, don't know, but we may go through on the tour, but what's it like to act the day-to-dayness of being in the White House and working in the White House?
You know, first of all, I must say when I got the call to come to the White House, and it's in the book, you'll see it, I actually declined. And if it's any young people in here, I think this is a note to the young people. I declined not because I didn't think I could do the job. I declined out of fear. You know, because you see things, you know, you see the White House on TV. You know, I had been working with my colleagues at the White House because the president was technically the titular head of the party. I had been in and out of the White House, but going there presented a particular challenge for this South Side girl. And you know, you didn't want to bring failure. So when I got the call from the chief of staff, I said, no, I don't think I want to come. And then I think that surprised me because everybody wants one of those 25 positions, which are assistants to the president. Then I got a call from Vice President Gore. So that gave me a little bit of pause, and I said, well, you can't say no to the Vice President. I just said, okay, sir, I'll think about it. Thank you so much for calling. I really appreciate it. He says, well, I'm going to have Erskine call you back. And by this time, I had let ridiculous take over, and I let prayer take in. So I started praying about it, and eventually I took the job. But I didn't even take the job because then he said, okay, now you're probably going to have to take a pay cut. And so I said, I can't take no pay cut. You know, I'm like one of the first generation graduates in my house. You know, you have to help the family out. And taking a $10,000 pay cut was like way too much for me. So I said, no again. And then he came back and took a $1,000 pay cut. So children, you can always negotiate, but make sure you got a skill set because you can't negotiate with nothing. But I think to answer Leah's question, I will say for me personally, every day I walked in that place, I was extremely humbled. I was always trying to figure out how could I use it to help our people, how could I use it to, as we have this favorite saying, how can I swing the doors wide open? It was a group of ladies. I think the greatest blessing I got to have while I was at the White House, it was a group of ladies who kind of raised me at Operation Push. And before they passed, one of them was very sick. I got the opportunity to bring them to the White House. I dined them in the mess, and you know, so you get to do things like that.
What's the mess?
Oh, I'm sorry. The mess is actually the cafeteria. It's called the mess because it's run by the U.S. Navy, but it's the most prestigious part of the White House. And so to see them sitting there, I'm supposed to be thinking about the president's policy. I know that's what y'all really want to hear about, but to me, what was more important was the fact that I got to share it with my family, with my community. But in terms of making a difference, if you ever get a chance to work for the government, she worked for Congress, she worked for labor. You must know that you have the opportunity to sit at a table with a president, a vice president, a cabinet secretary, or a congressional member. And sometimes they're going to say things, and some of your colleagues are going to say stuff that makes absolutely no sense. And they're going to expect you to co-sign. And you're going to have to look at them and say, I can't go there with you. Now, somebody else can. Now, no offense, but I'm not going there with you. And so you have to have the courage of your convictions when you're in those rooms. It's not just about being at the White House. Who are you when you go there? Are you going there with your values? Are you going there just because you want a title? And I will tell you, the one thing I told my staff, you better be in the business of knowing how to say yes, because you will come out of here and nobody will remember you. When they called you for a tour, you said no because you could. When they called you to just have a letter from the president for your grandmother's birthday, you said you couldn't do it. People remember the smallest things. And so we were in the business of service in the White House. Now, what the rest of the folks was doing, I can't tell you. I know what I was doing.
You mean Kanye who's at the White House today? We're going to have to disinfect the joint for 2020. Well, let's talk about our icons. There are so many remarkable men and women that we have worked with and served. I want to talk about Coretta Scott King, and I know Leah would like to possibly talk about Dorothy Height, perhaps Reverend Willie Barrow. But I want to talk about Dr. King, widow, Mrs. Coretta Scott King. We were at the King Center just 2 nights ago. And what was remarkable is that when we drove up, I looked at Yolanda and I said, Yolanda, I'm getting the chills. I'm getting emotional. I was a young kid coming out of Louisiana. Mrs. King hired me first to work on the bill to make Dr. King's birthday a holiday. And later, she kept me on to serve as the youth coordinator, the student coordinator, and later the coordinator of the 20th anniversary of the historic 1963 March on Washington. Mrs. King was quite a phenomenal woman. She was an organizer, a visionary. She was a great administrator, executive, but most importantly, she had a heart of gold. She was compassionate. And at a time when many people thought Mrs. King was hiring a quote-unquote young, inexperienced person who had just got out of college, what she saw in me was what I'm sure that Dr. King saw in Ella Baker. I'm sure that many of the leaders of the civil rights movement saw in Dorothy Cotton and those who have served. So I talk a lot about Mrs. Coretta Scott King in my book because she was an incredible force, a very strong woman of valor, and someone who also helped me get a seat at the table.
I was really fortunate to be raised in a church and in a nationalist, Pan-Africanist movement where there was no such thing as roles for women. All the roles were the same. And so women did what everybody else did. You know, they made the signs, they spoke at the rallies, they jumped the barricades, they served on security. So those were my models of women's leadership, is that you just do what you're called to do. And it's very empowering. I think the people who stood out to me, there were dozens of local activists that stood out to me, but the folks that sort of that I watched and that impacted me were Dr. Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X. She was a regular visitor, attendee of our church in Brooklyn. And she knew all the back routes, so when she would come, she'd slide up the back stairs and cut her way in, and she had a certain seat that she liked to sit in, and she was just, I marveled at her because after Malcolm was killed, she had to start her life all over again with a bunch of kids. And he was not the beloved figure nationally that Martin was, so she didn't get any help. It was Percy Sutton who secured her housing, secured her home. And she didn't have lots of people flocking to her, but she raised those girls. She put herself through school. She was really proud that she had an earned doctorate. So when they called her Dr. Betty, it's because she had written a dissertation. And I watched how she created her own self, took charge of her life, and moved herself forward until she became an icon in people's minds, that she was this vaunted woman. And so I took a lot of strength and energy from that. And then of course Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, who was one of the movement makers in the 60s. She was supposed to speak at the National March on Washington, but she gave up her spot so John Lewis could speak.
Oh well.
And so, because we remember there were no women speaking on that program, right? Dorothy Height had given up her spot, so I got to know her through her work at the National Council of Negro Women, and when I moved to Washington in 1997, I lived in her apartment. She let me have her apartment. She had moved upstairs, and Alexis Herman, who was also in our orbit, the Secretary of Labor, she was on the 6th floor. Dr. Height was on 1, and I was on 2. And I was Dr. Height's emergency contact. It was years before I understood what that meant, the importance of walking around with Dr. Dorothy Height's house keys. And that woman worked up until the time that she passed away. I'd go downstairs in the morning, I had a dog then, little dog, and I'd go down with whatever piece of clothes I could put my hand on, just looking like a hot mess, just to walk the dog. And Dr. Height would be down there in that lobby, completely dressed. Lipstick. 7 o'clock in the morning, I said, this old lady is down here again, dressed to the nines. I was so embarrassed, I would try to go out the back door, and she would catch me every time, Miss Daughtry. Oh, yes, Dr. Height. How are you this morning? And she'd call you over, and she would call us all in the morning when she had something she wanted us to do. And I guess it was a sign of the movement back then. She'd call you, she said, it would be some ungodly hour. Hello, Miss Daughtry. Yes, Dr. Height. And you immediately sit up. Yes, Dr. Height. And she said, this is what I need today. And she lists 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And she said, thank you, click. No goodbye, no can you do it, no do you have time, no what's your schedule. It didn't matter. This is what I need, and blah, blah, and I need it by 2 o'clock. Okay, click. But that's the kind of, and she got things done, she moved things. She was the only woman I knew who could call the White House, any White House, and get a president on the phone and get a meeting. Because she wanted one, because she had something to say. And she led the National Council of Negro Women, and the reason I knew she was sick was because she wasn't in the lobby. When I went to walk the dog, she wasn't in the lobby anymore, and she died about a month or so later. But her legacy lives on in the National Council of Negro Women. They have the only building on Pennsylvania Avenue, if you're ever in Washington, that is owned by Black people. It is bought and paid for, and here is the historic nature of that. It is on the site of the last slave market in the District of Columbia. So every time we walk into that building, 7th and Penn, 633 Pennsylvania Avenue, you're reminded that our ancestors were bought and sold there, and now the National Council of Negro Women owns it.
But Reverend Barrow, you might not know her, but she was the chairman of the board of Operation Push, and she was a firebrand. We used to call her Little Willie. So you just heard the story of me refusing to go to the White House and refusing to take a pay cut. Well, at the time when I met Reverend Barrow, I was actually trying to do an interview with her, and then I began to volunteer over at Operation Push. She eventually said, in her Reverend Barrow fashion, "You need to quit that job and come over here and help your people out." So I'm like calculating, quitting that job, okay, now, okay, I'm at Encyclopedia Britannica. Most of the young people don't even know what that is, but that was a book. Right, it was before Google and all of that. So I'm like, I wonder if they got health insurance. I wonder what the package is. You know how we young folks was thinking. And so I quit my good paying job. Now I wouldn't go to a good prestigious job, but I quit my good paying job and went and worked for Operation Push. So many years ago. I stayed there 7 years, and it was the best decision I had ever made, and it was primarily because that woman asked me, and she is a national treasure. I hope you get to know her through the book, because she was the force behind Reverend Jackson. If Reverend Barrow had not been the force behind Reverend Jackson when he started Operation Push, there would be no Reverend Jackson. Right. I can guarantee you that.
Well, I'm still in her life. Minyon could also talk about her remarkable relationship with Cicely Tyson. It's in the book. Dr. Maya Angelou, it's in the book. Our relationship and friendship with Oprah Winfrey is in the book. But one area that I think we should talk about before we get on to your questions is the dinners. Can we talk about the dinners? You know, I think it's important that we tell y'all about our super secret dinners that we have with potential presidential candidates, including Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So I'm gonna leave it up to my sisters to tell you the story, because I'll never talk and tell after I have a drink.
But it's all in the book. It's all in the book.
It's in the book, so we're not going to tell you everything because, you know.
We want you to read.
But what happened was in the 2008 presidential cycle, we were all getting calls by these various sets of folks, sets of white boys, who were planning dinners with the presidential candidates, and we were being invited to different dinners around town. And you know, one day we said, why don't we have our own dinners? Why are we going to their dinners? We should have our own dinners. So, you know, we each had an avenue to all of the folks who were running, so we started having our own dinners with the colored girls, and 5 of us. We almost always invite other sisters. And the point of the dinners for us was to get to know these people who thought that they might run for president, but also to understand their values and how they were thinking about things, but also to connect them with other people. So if you're moving around the country running for president and you're going to South Carolina, then you ought to know this sister in South Carolina. She may or may not endorse you, but she's the key to other voters. And so we wanted them to understand that there were a group of black women out there who could connect them, and that they ought to connect to if they were serious about building coalition in order to win elections. So we started having dinner with folks, and we had 3 rules. Come alone, no staff, because we thought that would help them to be a little less guarded. 2, they had to pay.
They had to pay.
If they couldn't afford to pay for dinner, they shouldn't be running for president. And 3,
we're not cheap.
No,
This ain't no burger thing.
we're not going to Applebee's. This is not Applebee's. There's no Wawa here. And 3, it's all off the record. No talking to the press. And I think everybody adhered except one.
Yes, he was eventually elected president. I guess that's
He
why.
didn't follow any of the rules.
No.
He broke staff. Well, he did pay. He did pay. Barack Obama did pay, but he did talk to the press too, and he did bring staff. So they were interesting. Each one was its own thing. And we go into a lot of detail in the book about the dinners, and I think what it did is sort of cement us as that they need to come talk to because we could be helpful. And we asked them a lot of questions about, Donna's famous question was,
how do you get to 2,168 delegates? I wanted them to understand that in order to win, you have to drive by and stop in places like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Brooklyn, New Orleans, Chicago. No more drive-by campaigning. You cannot win the Democratic primary by simply reaching out to rural, suburban people. You have to reach out to folks who live in the cities too. I want to know their strategy of reaching out to young people, to black women. And you know what? After 2018, you know when they come back and ask for some more dinners, I'm going to ask the same question.
And when they say they don't know, you need to pass them up. Because that means they're not ready. That's fundamental.
There were a couple who didn't know what 2168 meant. It's like, okay, can you check? this could be over right now.
Well, before taking your questions and get ready, I want to say a special thanks for Veronica Chamber. She's also listed on the book. Veronica is a African-American woman, Afro-Latina woman. She really was the glue that kept us on time and getting this book together, hearing our stories, pulling from us some of our super secret conversations as well as our friendship. And on that note, I want to say that had I not had my friends at my side, especially during that horrific hurricane that attacked the Gulf Coast back in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, you know, we all are going to go through storms in life. And we're going to see things that we never experienced and experience things that we've never seen. And I just want to say, to this day, many members of my family, they're still living in houses that Minyon supplied the furniture. They are still wearing designer jeans that my friend Yolanda sent down to ensure that my siblings had clothes. And of course, I wouldn't be here and would be remiss if I didn't say how important it was to have Leah at my side to not just lift us up in prayer, but also supply so much support and love from the DNC, where the staff, Marvin Turner and several others, drove down 3 trucks of supplies to the people of Louisiana. So that's what real friendship was about.
You're not here in an official capacity, are you?
No, I'm not, actually. Actually, I just came to hang out.
Oh, okay.
And I don't do that a lot.
When I was running the convention and we would have the media walkthroughs and I asked for questions, Denise would be the first hand up every time. And she always asked something. I'm like, Denise, why you gotta start me off with the hard question? But I love you, but I could depend on her.
Well, most of the time I was asking the questions that everybody else wanted to ask.
But they were afraid.
Well, and I'm going to do that now. That's kind of my job. Because you all are in the book and you're talking about, the experiences of being African-American women working with the Democratic Party. Now, it's one of the things that I got out of 2016 is that there are folks who are trying to take a shortcut to the nomination. And that shortcut was not dealing with African American women, particularly in the South. So I guess my question for you is, when you sit down and you talk to these folks, over dinner about wanting to be president, is that something that you're going to emphasize from here on out? Because if you spend any time on Twitter, you hear a whole lot of people talking all of this, well, why do we have to talk to black women crap? And they're forgetting that if it were not for black women, Doug Jones wouldn't be a senator in Alabama. So I guess, are you going to be tougher about that? Because it's obviously becoming a thing.
So can I just make it plain? 1/3 of the congressional candidates who are viable, that will help Democrats take back the House, 1/3 are women of color. So we're not only telling people to vote Democratic, we're saying vote for Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts, Johanna Hayes in Connecticut, Lucy Macbeth in Georgia, Lauren Underwood in Illinois. We're saying that we have black women running for lieutenant governor in the state of Illinois. We're saying that we have African American women at the table. So if they don't see us coming, then they can't win. But we need to lift up and vote for those women. We need to make sure that Stacey Abrams becomes the first black woman governor in the United States of America. Our political power is known. We know it. We saw it in Alabama last December 12, 2017. But on Tuesday, November 6, 2018, we can make the kind of history that nobody envisioned. But Shirley Chisholm knew it, Barbara Jordan knew it, and all of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, they know that if black women and Latinas get out this fall, we can change the face of Congress. Yes, we are going to keep talking about black women, women in general. Women are the majority of voters in this country, and it's time that we take our seats at the table.
Good evening. My name is Arica. Thank you, ladies, for being here tonight in Philadelphia. I'm really honored to be here and just sitting in your presence. I'm from Southwest Philadelphia, and I'm a community organizer, and I believe that was my calling because my friend that's here tonight actually told me about the job. And before this, I didn't know what I was doing, but I found out later people get paid to organize people, and I have been doing it the whole time since high school. So I guess I'm just asking for some advice. As an organizer, young organizer who's in this work, I didn't know anything about turf and organizational relationships, and I'm the type of person just a doer. So when people call me from the community to come out, I just go and do. Even though it's nonprofits in Philly that's like, oh, this is our turf, this is our turf. I just go out and do. So I guess I'm trying to, not ruffle any feathers, but I do know that there's a need for organization that's really coming from black people, and especially black women who hold down communities, and there's an overwhelmingly amount of white organizers in Philadelphia. So I just want some advice when it comes to organizing across turf and not wanting to ruffle feathers, but knowing that there's a need out there for more black women to organize and to be paid to do it. What's just some of your advice to tread lightly or?
No. Absolutely not. In fact, you should keep treading. And the truth is, you should not even see the turf, because that's not why you're in it. You're in it to make a difference. You're in it so that your people. What type of organizing do you do?
I build community chapters from Southwest and West Philly. That's where I'm designated to. But I hold them. I'll tell them about the bills that's going on in City Council.
Oh, absolutely. You got to keep going.
Absolutely.
Because you know why? Because you are doing something so vital for the community. A lot of times, we heard this wonderful saying from this radio announcer yesterday. A lot of times we will wear history on our shirts, but we don't know history. And what you are trying to do is educate our community, because sometimes these bills are very complex, and you can't get caught up in you can be respectful. You can be respectful, but you don't have to get caught up in the whole who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down. Because once you do that, you're going to start majoring in the minor, I guarantee you. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, if you're dealing in values, if you're dealing in ethics, if you're not trying to run anybody over like a lawnmower, because a lot of times that only comes about when you're trying to take somebody down. But you're trying to lift people up, and you have to stay grounded in that, because we could have all been sidelined by somebody, and they still probably want to sideline us, but you just have to have the courage of your convictions. And if they don't understand what you're doing, then just be respectful about that and say, this is what I'm doing now. If you guys are going to do it, then okay, great. But if it's not going to be done, just know I want to do it, and I'm happy to do it, and just keep moving on. And I guarantee you, they're going to start following you later.
The question I have is, with Stacey Abrams running in Georgia, and Gilliam running in Florida, and Beto, who really wants to represent the black community and stands up for a lot of things that is important to the black community. One of the questions I have is, what do we do about voter suppression? Like in Georgia, with this governor who, if you register to vote and your hyphen is in the wrong, they have taken so many thousands of people off the rank, off the rolls, and the majority of them are black. So what do we do with voter suppression? I was reading Dr. Joy Brewery's book, and she said even though the civil rights laws on the book and the voter rights laws on the book, it doesn't mean that the government follows the law. So what can we do about this voter suppression? That was very distressing to me when I heard that all these people are being disenfranchised, and some of them don't even know that they're being disenfranchised. So what do we do with that? And then with the Supreme Court just ruled against avenues that would circumvent voter suppression. What can women of color and influential women of color do to combat these tactics that people use to keep people from their right to vote?
Well, I too am worried about the systematic assault on the right of eligible citizens to participate in our American democracy. It's happening all across the country. The purging of eligible citizens right before Election Day. The long lines that are created in certain precincts because, as you all know, there's no federal right to vote. It is a state right. And you have to understand the rules, and if there's no allocation of resources, what they do is they go by the last midterm. For example, in Pennsylvania, last time you guys voted in the midterm, your turnout was under 30%. Suppose they decide in those so-called precincts not to allocate but one machine. And this year there's a surge in turnout, and you get there at a certain hour of the day and the line is out of the door. So we have to, unfortunately, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, NAACP Inc. Fund, along with Democratic groups, Stacey Abrams and her campaign, we have to take them to court. We have to force them to go ahead and process those voter registration forms. But we also have to take responsibility as citizens to check your status today. 26 days from now, don't start screaming on the radio that you were purged. You need to check your status today. If you have moved since the last election, check your status. Make sure you know your precinct. These schemes, these illegal schemes to deny us the right to vote is happening across the country because the Voting Rights Act in 2013 was weakened. It was weakened in Shelby v. Holder. So we have to take prudent steps at the state level as well as the local level to ensure that we have machines. And I don't have to tell any of you in this room, be very careful in the days leading up to the election. Watch what comes across the mail. This is a battleground state, ladies and gentlemen, because you have a senatorial race, you have a gubernatorial race, and you also have at least 4 of the 23 seats that the Democrats need to take back to Congress. So you are going to be targeted for voter intimidation, voter suppression. So this is our fight. Dr. King and John Lewis and Dorothy Height and many others opened the door, but now we got to keep it open for every American to participate in our electoral democracy.
Well, the only thing I would add is that I, as individuals, you can get on the radio and start seriously, because one place that black people listen, they listen to talk radio, and we really need to start making sure that they have these message points. And you also need to call your state party, you need to call your local elected officials, ask them a series of questions. What are you doing about purging? What are you doing about hacking? What are you doing about this? I mean, we have to use these, I know with young people, let them tweet, but some of us older people, we got to call. But you got to hear a real live voice so these people can pay attention to you. You know, it's clear you know what you're talking about. So call your elected officials now.
Yeah, all your elected officials,
Yeah.
So I want everyone's questions get heard, so I'm just going to actually have all you ask your questions, and then you can answer them all at once if that's okay.
Okay.
All right.
Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for coming out to Philadelphia. I am in awe to be in your presence, and I'm so excited. With that being said, what you were saying, Ms. Brazile, about identities being hacked, that happened to me the last election I tried to vote, and I was registered as a andraquarian, something I'd never heard of before, and I know I didn't register that way, and eventually, I wasn't able to vote in that election, so it happened to me, and I'm somebody who votes all the time, so it can happen to anybody, just to throw it out there. My question tonight for all of you is a very general question, but it's in a very specific context. When you consider what happened in the 2000 election with the Al Gore win, but it being decided or forfeited by the Supreme Court, when you think of the DNC possibly having some manipulation from Hillary Clinton with Bernie Sanders, her becoming the nominee, when you think of the Russian influence that has been speculated and sometimes confirmed in the last election, what do you say to a young person who says, my vote doesn't matter? I just had this said by one of my students the other day. What do you say in that specific context? I don't want to vote. I don't have to vote because it doesn't matter.
You know what I tell them? I tell them, when your parents are sitting on the roof waiting for somebody to come and get them when there's a flood, that's why you vote. I tell them, when somebody is murdered and you want to get on the jury, that's why you vote. I tell them, when you are putting your hard-earned money into the system so that there's taxes and you want the appropriations to come back to your neighborhood so they can fix those potholes, so that they can keep your schools open, that's why you vote. You tell them that those 537 votes that decided the 2000 election, the 5-4, disappointed all of us, but we kept on moving and we kept on doing the right thing so that we could one day get an election with Barack Obama as the next president. It took us a while, but we did it. You tell them that in 2016, Hillary Clinton competed in all 50 states and got more votes, more delegates than Bernie Sanders, and that the election was not rigged because she went out there and she earned the support of pledged delegates as well as unpledged delegates. You tell them that the Russians hacked in our elections to interfere to help Donald Trump. Mr. Putin said that as recently as June 15th. You tell them that if they give away their power, if they don't want their voting power, then don't tell me about their problems, because that is their power. You lend politicians your power.
That's right.
You lend them every 2 years, every 4 years. And when you decide not to become a voting citizen, then you get a Donald Trump that will ban you from coming back into the country because your last name might be Abdul or Muhammad. You tell them that that border wall might go up along the Texas and the Rio Grande, but it could also go right down their street and they may not be able to get no services. You tell them. You tell them. You explain it to, I break it down for my nieces and nephews every day, and I break it down for my students at Georgetown and Howard.
Thank you so much.
All right, good evening. My name is Asantwe Pumature. My question is for Sister Minyon. If I understood you correctly, you said you were some type of advisor to former President Clinton, correct? Is that correct? Did I hear correctly? Okay. So I'm wondering then, did Mr. Clinton adhere to your advice in regards to federal mandatory minimums, welfare reform, and the war on drugs? Because those three things still have a negative impact on our communities today. And the whole thing with welfare reform led to now a crisis among major cities where children are taken away from their families, not because of abuse or neglect, but because they are poor. So why didn't he listen to your advice, or what happened with your advice?
Well, I wish I could say I was there at that time, but I was certainly involved in some of the strategies on the outside. And I can tell you that for the people that were there, it was a vigorous give and take and a vigorous back and forth. And if you go back and look through some of the most recent records of President Clinton, in fact, he has addressed the crime bill and some of the things that he feels like went dreadfully wrong. And I think what people don't understand about the crime bill, when the crime bill left the White House, it looked a certain way. When it got up to Congress with Newt Gingrich, it became another way. And that's why it's important for us to pay attention to these branches of government. Now, I will be the first to concede that African Americans, Latinos, and even some of the cabinet members were having vigorous debates about this crime bill. And for those of us who were living through the crack epidemic and listening to the mayors and listening to the Congressional Black Caucus crying out for help, I think the final straw became when one of the little kids in Chicago was shot at point blank range, and the mayors just went crazy on the White House. But I can tell you that bill was altered once it got out of the White House. But your point is well taken. I believe that was not a policy that I will stand by. I don't think even the president stands by all of that. There are some good pieces in that policy, and I think it would take us all night to explain where the good pieces. There were some good pieces in the welfare reform. In fact, Leah can tell you, Alexis Herman and Donna Shalala fought to make sure that jobs were put in the welfare reform bill, that daycare was put in the welfare reform bill, all
transportation.
All of them. Yeah. So
and to Minyon's point about the branches of government, the president can suggest a bill, but he has no vote. He has no vote on bills.
That's right.
The Congress passes legislation. So the president, as much as he made, as she said, things went up there one way, and by the time everybody got their hands on it, an amendment, it ends up with something else. I was in First Clinton. I was in Brooklyn with the crack epidemic. And some of our members couldn't come to church because they didn't want to walk past the crack house. And you were afraid for your children to walk across Fort Greene Park because the vials under the feet and the gangs and they were calling every day to our church, our house of worship, to our pastor, who was an activist, saying, you gotta do something. Because my child just got shot by the resident drug dealer. My grandma got beat over the head. And so there was this outcry from a lot of grassroots people also saying there has to be something that's happening because the fabric of our community is being torn apart by a couple of knuckleheads that's running whatever they're running, when we all know where drugs come from because we're not growing it, we're not creating it, but it was something in our community, but it was creating all kinds of fractiousness. So I just add that 2 cents, but thank you for your question, sister.
Well, I just want to say this too on the crime bill, and this is why it's really important that you all understand the power of your vote. When President Obama came into office, they began to look at some of these bills. And Eric Holder, who many of us know and worship and love, began to systematically change that stuff. And you probably didn't hear a lot about it because he was doing it maybe by regulations, he was doing it under cover of darkness, because the minute you start changing 3 strikes you're out here and 2 strikes you're out there, it's an outcry. So he was changing laws, not laws, but he was changing policy. The minute the Republicans went in, and let me tell you, the pen, they struck out everything. And that's why it's so important that we understand that President Obama's legacy has been decimated. Everything good he did that you never saw has been decimated by these people.
I'll say one thing. We need a 21st century voting rights act, a 21st century criminal justice bill. We need a 21st century healthcare bill, infrastructure bill. Everything that was done and undone in the 20th century, we now need to understand we're in the 21st century. And we have to redo it. That's why when we elect people, you don't give them a blank slate. You say, this is one of the 2 or 3 issues I care about, and this is one. I believe now that we have figured out the opioid crisis, and it is a crisis, and we're now putting billions of dollars toward finding a solution. We should allow every non-violent criminal who went there with a dime bag, a nickel bag, or whatever, we should allow them to get the hell out of prison, get back on with their lives, and strike back from their life. That's my position.
My questions are, number 1, as a young black woman, how do you get to where you all are in your poise and how you present yourselves and being at the table, not just with your white counterparts, but black men as well, who may challenge, your thoughts and your opinions, or you're not able to be as vocal? That's number 1. How do you handle that? I'm someone that's very passionate. I talk a lot. I have a lot of expression and that. Number 2, Pastor Leah, how do you begin to address the whitewashing of Christianity and across the board, where somewhere like Philadelphia, where we are more word of faith movement. I mean, just throughout the United States. How do you begin to address that from bringing out exactly as a believer who Christ was and how he was not about all this bullcrap that we are hearing? How do we begin to address, you know, the reality of justice in the Word of God, where individuals are fighting one another, and then those, like, how do you get those people to the forefront that we know that can speak from a platform where you have those Kenneth Copelands and all the other people, Creflo Dollar and all of them that's making it foolishness, and then you have church folks in the black community following behind what they think is right because, oh, abortion is the number one thing. We don't want to kill what God created. And then you have these people voting, people like Donald Trump. Like, that's, y'all got the gist of what I'm trying to say.
Hello, Queens. How are you? How's everybody? How y'all doing tonight? Okay. I'm going to make this real quick. I am a licensed attorney, college professor, and I need to run for Senate. It's not an option. It's not something I can wait on. And I've been thinking about this for a while, and I'm just looking for where to start. How's the best place to start? I've thought about local government. They get on my nerves, but I'll go there. If I need to go to city council, I'll do that. I'm just tired of my local politicians not feeding my people, and I need to figure out how to do that. The best way to strategize to do that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Malika. I want to thank you guys so much because your energy is everything. I love it. But I would like for you guys to discuss, kind of piggybacking on what the sister before me just noted, can you explain to these women the essentialness and the importance of supporting black women that take the stand, that are not afraid to go out and say, I see the issues in my local community. I see the issues that city council's not doing. I see the issues that certain offices are not performing at the effective level, the efficient level that's beneficial to the people that they need to serve. And I'm with you. Not to just sit around and say, yeah, I know we need to change. And then when the time comes, our black women run and we sit down like they're not doing anything. And we cast the vote for the other person just for the simple fact that we didn't eat dinner with her, we didn't hang out with her. She's not our best friend and following us on Facebook. But understanding that it's essential to get behind the people who are not afraid to go against the political machine.
My name is Kendall Fullard. It's an honor to be in your presence, ladies. And I am running for city council at large next year, 2019. So those ladies who spoke before me, you set the stage for me. My thing is that there are the local politicians, they used to have city council meetings aired on the radio. They now don't do that anymore. So there are a lot of things happening in city council that the community and the constituents are not aware of. I'm already a bad guy. I'm already speaking out against these politicians. For instance, Mayor Kenny today announced that 30% of the prisoners have been released from prisons, and that's a great thing. But what he forgot to say was that they have this $400 million prison that they just built that they need to fill up. That's one of the things. So I said all that to say, I'm running for city council at large next year, and I'm a little afraid because I'm very outspoken and I'm not with the program. So when I saw that the title of the book was for women who are considering politics, I knew I had to be here. So I'm just going to absorb all this great energy and ask you for your prayers.
What's your name?
Kendall Fullard.
You gotta know your stuff. You can't go in the room and not know what you're talking about. Because it is still true that we have to work harder, that you gotta know more. That is still true, and that's just not gonna change. So first thing is be prepared, and then once you are prepared, then you can speak with confidence about what you know. My father always told us the person with the experience is never at the mercy of the person with the argument. So if you know, and you know that you know, that is half the battle. So I wanted to say that on the whole thing about Christianity, you know, we're at a crossroads, I think, in Christianity, or really in faith, but Christianity is the one that we see the most around what the gospel really means. Right, so you have the white evangelicals who clearly have a different Bible than the rest of us.
I don't know what Bible that is, but they got different Bible. And then you got black Christianity, which is itself divided, right? Because I'm in the process of writing this essay, the black church is dead. Long live the black church. Because you have a portion of the black church who is so far removed from its origins of social justice. And then you've got this remnant that is now rising up with new voices. And I think what we have a responsibility to do, those of us who understand the true nature of the gospel as a social justice, that the gospel calls us to care for our community and to pursue the justice and the mercy and the love of God. We have to make our voices louder. And we can't be afraid to challenge forces that do not represent the gospel that as we understand it. Sometimes we just say, oh, Creflo, and we turn to challenge. No, we have to know enough and be brave enough to rise up and say, that is not the gospel. That is not the gospel. And the number one issue, y'all want to talk about abortion? I'm glad you care about the unborn child. Can you care about the born child? But that takes us standing up and being willing to claim not just the love of it, but the boldness of Christianity. To step forward and to defend our faith.
Thank you. I'm so glad I hang out with Leah because you know I'm Catholic. I just go around asking people for forgiveness. I have cussed my way into so many doors. I've made people so uncomfortable. But I'm so glad that I can sit next to two very graceful, very calming, charming, remarkable, value-centered black women. Now, that being said, I'm gonna make it quick. I have been involved in politics for 50 years. I started at the age of 9.
Add 50 plus 9.
7 presidential campaigns, 56 congressional, as House and Senate.
How you got 7 and I got 9?
Because I didn't get paid. I helped a lot of people that didn't pay me. I don't count them. I count the ones that paid me. A lot of people get free help. Y'all stop being free. Okay? No more being free. They pay everybody else, and when they see us, they say, oh, you volunteer? Hell no. I give my service. Hell no. Give me my money. I'm like my mama, put my money on the table.
You got beat like Aretha and put it in the pocketbook.
And 19 state and local, just recently London Breed in San Francisco. I went out there because they said she could not win. And then they changed the rules. The mayor died. She was the chair of the board of supervisors. They changed the rule. She had to step down from being acting mayor to run for mayor, and she still beat him. So don't tell me it's going to be easy, but you can never grow weary in doing good. The Bible said you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. Throughout our history, nobody has given us a seat. We had to fight for it and take our seat. So if you're running for city council or you're running for the United States Senate, the rules apply. Know your game. Know who you are. Build the base. Network. Visibility is viability. Nobody owes you nothing. You're going to have to fight for everything. You're going to have to build a coalition, raise as much money as you can. And let me just say this past weekend, I was in Connecticut. The Democratic Party didn't endorse Johanna Hayes. She wasn't endorsed by the county party or whatever. She ran and she won. And now she's going to become the first black woman elected from the great state of Connecticut. I can go on and on and on, but here's what I want to let you know. If it's in your heart and you know it's your time, I say 2 things. Why you? Because there's no one better. Why now? Because tomorrow's not soon enough. Go ahead and run.
I'm actually going to use that as a beautiful ending point. We really have to get to the signing, if you're okay with that.